It's a Wednesday edition of Orange and Blue today. And man, we begin this offseason with some plans at inside linebacker, plans at defensive tackle, some plans for at safety. And then sometimes the plans change, Mace.
Well, what is the saying? Life is what happens when you're busy making other plans, right?
Yes.
Didn't John Lennon say that?
And life happened today in Philadelphia.
Yeah, or the other saying from draft day that we live in a different world now than we lived in yesterday, last month, 30 seconds ago. I mean, there was a moment this afternoon when some news broke that we lived in a different world than we lived in 30 seconds ago. And I think you were experiencing that on the air because you were talking a little bit about the possibility of getting Zach Vaughn in free agency, and next thing you knew, Zach Vaughn had signed a 3-year, $51 million extension with the Philadelphia Eagles to stay with his good buddy Vic Fangio and not reunite with the coach who drafted him, Sean Payton.
Yeah, and looking at that, you think the Philadelphia Eagles, they spent on Saquon Barkley. Where's that money going to come from? Howie Roseman got it done. So Zach Vaughn not going to be in the Broncos' plans, off the board. We can talk about how this changed the dollar structure for perhaps a Nick Bolton. We can talk about if the Broncos have other plans at inside linebacker. I know people are hitting up on Twitter about players there as well, Mace. But yeah, Zach Vaughn stays. The market, boy, it gets pretty healthy with that Bond deal from Philadelphia. And so now the Broncos have to shift gears if Bond was amongst their targets, which we imagine he would have been.
Yeah, because that's the position, if you're talking about splash impact, wanting to get the spine of the defense fortified, that's one of the spots that you were looking at, and really looking back at how the defense faded in the last month and against Buffalo, especially against the run. That's where we saw some of the cracks become canyons in that run defense. Certainly there were some, there were some issues up front on the defensive line as well. And that's why I would say you start with bringing back DJ Jones and then add to that somewhere in the draft at minimum. Or if you don't bring back DJ Jones, go get you some Poona Ford from the Los Angeles Chargers, who, has basically caused the Broncos a lot of trouble. Certainly did this past year. But linebacker, that's really where the heart of the defense, and that's really where a lot of the issues came to bear down the stretch. And you had, certainly the spirit was willing from players like Justin Sternad, but there are reasons why players are backups and players are starters sometimes.
Right.
And
right.
You simply, you got by for a while, but you need to get better there than you had. And this is where not having $89 million of dead cap like you did last year, being in a much better situation, allows you to shop in a different aisle than you were last year, when really you had to be selective. And that's why, it wasn't going to the top of the market. It was bringing somebody like Cody Barton, who, was a sometimes starter, sometimes backup in his first 5 years in the league.
Right. The Nick Bolton deal, now to nip it in the bud for anyone out there that thinks this, like, well, the team that has him is going to let him get away. Look what Philadelphia did with Zach Vaughn. Yeah, the team that has Nick Bolton in terms of Kansas City is still over the cap right now. I believe it's $6 million and change over the cap as we stand here on March 5th, or I guess say sit here at our desks in our home studios, Mace. Mm-hmm. But like, all right, that deal is going to change. And full disclosure, if Bond and Bolton would have both been available, it's my belief that Bond would have gotten more money. But Bolton, with this pay bunt for Bond, it's not like he's going to get less money. He's going to get some money too. Not as much as Bond. But if you're the Broncos, still be prepared to come to the table for an inside linebacker with your checkbook ready.
Are you willing to pay Nick Bolton $15 million a year?
I think in this market and just kind of where you're at, the answer is yes.
That's probably what it's going to take with Zach Vaughn at $17 million. I think Nick Bolton's probably $15 million. That's tough.
Pretty steep.
That's tough because this is where you honestly say, okay, is he really a $15 million a year player? Zach Bond, based on what we saw last year, ascendant. I don't really think Nick Bolton is ascendant. And so that's where do you have a conversation about the next group? I mean, I think you could basically say, okay, the top 3 inside linebackers heading into the market were Zach Bond, Nick Bolton, Dre Greenlaw. Okay, Bond off the market. Do we now talk about a guy about Jameen Sherwood out of the New York Jets, for example, the converted safety there? Now, the buzz that I was hearing around Indianapolis was the Jets would like him back, and if he doesn't stay with the Jets, that Robert Saleh, Jeff Ulbrich, his former Jets defensive coaches who've moved on to San Francisco and Atlanta, respectively, would be interested in bringing him back. So he's going to have some suitors that would probably keep him in a scheme with which he has a lot of familiarity, and it might be a more comfortable environment for him. But that's, you start going to the next line. Or do you even say, okay, a 1-year solution that might be cheaper because these guys are 34 and 35 years old? I mean, is it a Bobby Wagner, Levante David conversation? The problem is you are talking about guys in their mid-30s.
Right.
But those are players who, while they have lost a half step, are still pretty effective and certainly can maybe bring you a little extra leadership on that side of the ball. There are positives and negatives to bring guys like that into the room.
Yeah, and I know, for example, Mark Schlereth is against getting Nick Bolton because he talks about the players in front of him being so good. I can make the same argument about Zach Bond. Zach Bond is an ascendant player, but it's not like Bolton. And, we've talked to Kansas City people that said, oh, his speed's gone. Well, still looked pretty fast to me in the Super Bowl. And Bolton doesn't uncover, but here's the secret, Mace. A lot of these inside linebackers don't uncover when a guard gets to him at the second level. You know what that big man does? He moves the smaller linebacker out of the way. So I'm not going to see Nick Bolton, with a guard on him and thinking, well, he can't fight through that. There's a lot of inside linebackers that can't do that.
So then maybe do you ask yourself, is it more important to get another defensive lineman?
Ding, 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 ding.
And this is where another thing comes into play, because as our friend Chris Thomason put out there today on social media, we've talked about Zach Allen being in his contract year. That's something that's looming over the Broncos. And it's one of the reasons why we talk about defensive line is maybe not that must have in the offseason, but something that you certainly have to target. Zach Allen, according to Chris Thomason, wants $25 million a year from his next contract.
Whew. Okay.
That's more than you're giving Pat Surtain on an average annual basis.
Interesting.
Yes.
And you've got to pay Nick Bonito.
Yes. And the edge market keeps going up. Not that he's going to get a Max Crosby-like contract, because Crosby is more accomplished, more proven. But if Max Crosby's worth $35.5 million a year, as he is now getting from that 3-year extension that he agreed to with the Raiders, what is Nick Bonito worth?
I think 25's too low.
I mean,
for the market, you'd have to start at 30.
I'd say conservatively, it's 23 to 24. And I think realistically, probably at least 25.
Yeah.
And that's if you do it before another regular season snap. I mean, I think with Bonito, if you want to get the price in before it accelerates further, of course you can't, obviously with him being a guy who was drafted in 2022, you can't talk contract with him until you get to the new league year. I think really you get past this first wave here, you might as well go through the off season and let him go through OTAs and minicamp, because if you gave him an extension in like early May and then he, had an injury, a severe injury or something like that, you'd be feeling awful. There's that window from about mid-April through mid-June where his value where if you gave him a contract, you could only find yourself in trouble by doing it that early, because his per year value almost certainly isn't going to go up, but it could go down because of an injury suffered on the practice field. The sweet spot starts when you finish OTAs / minicamp and you get in training camp, like starting with when Quinn Miners got his deal last year, right? Quinn Miners got it right before training camp. They got through the offseason, and then they got the Miners deal done. That's probably the sweet spot for getting Nick Bonitto deal done before you get to the regular season, because if you start getting into the regular season and he builds on last year's 13.5 sack year, and it looks like he's going to have 16 or 17 sacks, whoa, mama, you might be talking about 19 or 29, $30 million a year.
Yeah, I think 30 is that number, and 25 if he takes a kind of a hometown deal. That's 10 million less than Max Crosby, and Nick Bonitto, certainly a player that has more to show.
Okay, now real quick, just to kind of go over numbers here, because this could come up with Nick Bonitto. Projected franchise tag for linebackers for next year. And the way they group them, they don't do an edge rusher grouping in the franchise / transition tag valuations. It's just,
oh, that sucks for them.
It's defensive tackle, defensive end, linebacker. Basically, there's an assumption in these that everyone runs a 4-3 rather than a 3-4.
Okay.
The NFL needs to rethink this, in my humble opinion. But nevertheless, the franchise tag valuation for linebackers projected for 2026 is $29.702 million, which is second behind the projected valuation of the quarterback franchise tag. So that's actually a number to keep in mind as you get into negotiations. Like, let's say the Broncos don't get something done between now and the start of training camp with Nick Bonitto, and he gets off to a hot start and looks like he's going to be on a sack a game pace, which would take that contract value ticking up. You'd have that $29.702 million number in the back of your mind as a franchise tag. And you'd sort of be budgeting around that, saying, okay, well, if we can't get anything done, we're going to get him on the franchise tag, and then we'll figure, until we can figure something out from there.
Yeah, and you have until mid-July. Right.
Yeah, it's not what you want to do, but you have that option.
You've got options, and players are looking for deals. We'll see if Zach Allen can get that number. What did Chris in his tweet say that Spotrac had for the estimated value? I think it was $22 million a year, top of my head. So, Allen wants 25. The market says 22. Sounds like they could come to some sort of an agreement.
Yeah, 22.1. The thing is with Zach Allen, it's the skill set, because he is a pass rushing interior defensive lineman, and those are pretty rare. The edges get the money, and that's sort of what teams are used to in their cap accounting. But when you find those interior pass rushers, they are scarcer commodities that can do it as well as Zach Allen does it. And so that's the sort of thing, when you get to the agent having the conversations with the Broncos and their brass, the agent's going to talk about the relative scarcity of the skill set and the production that Zach Allen provides, and maybe not leading the Broncos in sacks, but certainly I believe he led the team in quarterback hits last year. Did he not?
I believe so. And pressures there as well might have been on that list as well with Allen. And with added defensive tackle help, that's only going to make Allen better. We've probably seen the best, Mace, but I don't believe we'll see much of a step back if there is with Zach Allen. I'm not sure how much more is left, juice to squeeze, whatever, but it's like he's at the top of his game. He's going to get paid like he's at the top of his game.
Well, and that's the other question. Nick Bonitto is sitting here going into year 4. Zach Allen is about to go into year 7 of his career. And that matters as well. And when you're looking at Zach Allen's contract and you're talking about an extension beyond this year, you're talking about years 8, 9, and 10. What is the production in those years going to look like? What is the production in Nick Bonito's years 5, 6, and 7 going to look like? When you're talking about an edge, those ought to be peak production years. Zach Allen, you may be looking at a little bit of a dip, and that's something that may come into the conversation. The other thing is, it's a chicken and the egg equation, right? Is what Nick Bonito does on the edge, how much of that is set up by what Zach is doing on the interior? Because you could argue even back in the 2023 season when the Broncos didn't have any double-digit sackers, but yeah, Jonathan Cooper, Nick Bonito both get to 8+ sacks, that Allen, even though he didn't get the recognition league-wide that he got in 2024, Allen, as the season went on, was becoming an extremely efficient and productive pass rusher. And I mean, to me, the thing about Allen in his first season with the Broncos, I know some thought it was a disappointment, but I didn't think that was the case. The fact that he was as efficient a pass rusher with the Broncos as he was in that last season with the Cardinals when he didn't have J.J. Watt to take the pressure off him like he did in Arizona showed me that Zach Allen had the goods, and he just built on it this past year. The question is, at what point does the build reach a peak before there's a decline? Like, have we seen peak Zach Allen already, or is there another peak yet to come? That's what makes this rough, and this is part of the conversations that have to be had, because inevitably sometimes in these deals you end up paying for services already rendered.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's not necessarily about your feelings. It's not necessarily about your past performance, but sometimes it is. Sometimes.
And this is why it's notable that the Broncos have formal meetings with Walter Nolan and Kenneth Grant.
If there is a position that's drafted that is not running back or tight end, defensive tackle would be my choice in the first round, but perhaps not safety, which leads us into a conversation. Actually, you got to talk to Jordan Reed from ESPN, one of the best draft evaluators out there. So let's get into this safety conversation, which we've seen in a couple of mocks floating around out there.
Yeah, Jordan Reed is on this view, and so is Charles Davis of CBS Sports and NFL Network. Both of them have Nick Emanwori walked to the mock. Well, I wish I could edit that out. Nick Emanwori mocked to the Denver Broncos, and maybe outside of SEC circles, draft Nick circles, there wasn't a lot of familiarity with him until he had that scouting combine workout last week that was highlighted by that 4.38 40 time, which, comes from a guy who's 220 pounds, 6'3". I mean, he's big as far as safeties go. He's fast. I mean, I'm not saying he's Steve Atwater, okay? But think of Steve Atwater with more straight line speed in terms of the athletic measurables. And that's what you're talking about with him. Now, there has not been a safety drafted in the first round since 2022. So this is also a positional value argument. And with what the Broncos did last year in letting go of Justin Simmons and having a starting safety tandem of Brandon Jones and PJ Locke, who were less together in terms of cost than Justin Simmons on his own, the Broncos sort of made their choice. Sean Payton made his choice in terms of positional value of the safety position. However, when you have somebody who's got some special traits, and it is a position that is not the must-have, but it's definitely not far down the list of areas you want to address, it's worth considering. And so I asked Jordan Reed about Emanwori and also just about going safety in round one and the positional value argument. And here's what Jordan Reed had to say to me.
Yeah, safety's always a touchy subject just because there's some guys that don't go in the first round and everybody wonders why when this guy went on to be super productive, or there's some guys that do go in the first round and end up being worth it. Kyle Hamilton is one guy that immediately comes to mind, that a lot of people are wondering why he slipped to the number 14 overall pick. So, and it's different for every single team. Just like with running back, it's different as far as how you value those guys. If you have an elite level type of safety or upper echelon type of prospect at safety, I've always been of the belief that they can completely change your defense. And I think Nick Emmanwori definitely can be that type. And, you know, he's not your traditional single high free safety that can change everything on the third level. But as far as the second and the first level, I definitely think he could be that force multiplier just because he can wear so many hats. On the back end, he could play strong safety, he could play rover, you could blitz him as a nickel. There's so many different things that he can do, and especially when you get a freak athlete like that, adding him into the secondary, I think he could be another added piece to a very talented defense that played well last year.
Force multiplier and rover, a rover and a joker.
Rover is the defensive joker.
Sometimes defenses call it joker too, but
Yes.
Either way, we'll call it rover and a joker. How about that?
Wouldn't that be something to get you a joker and get you a rover?
Sounds like a magic act.
Red Rover, send Emmanwori right over.
Ha.
Yes.
Send the new Derwin James right over.
Yeah, now...
And he's more than a combine freak. I wanted to say that, Mace, because people, if you're just jumping on board and you only heard about him first at the combine, take it from Mace, take it from me. He is not just a combine freak. Very freakishly athletic, of course, but on film, you see the dude blowing up plays.
He's a guided missile out there, is what he is. I mean,
heat seeking.
Yeah, that's the simplest and clearest way I can describe him. And not just a missile, but a guided missile, because he knows where he's going. He knows how he reads screenplays as they develop. That's a key trait to me in safeties, is being able to diagnose those types of plays as they happen and get in position to diffuse them. He'd be with all respect to PJ Locke, Emmanwori would be a day one starter for the Broncos.
Sure. Yeah.
And so you'd feel good about your depth because you'd have a starter in reserve. It would be kind of like, I think it was 04 when the Broncos had Nick Ferguson and Kenoy Kennedy coming back, and they signed John Lynch. And so they had Lynch and Kennedy starting and Ferguson backing up. And then Ferguson moved back into the starting lineup the following season. You kind of there was that 1 year you sort of had an embarrassment of riches in terms of quality safeties. And you'd probably feel that way because you'd have a decent starting caliber safety in reserve if you drafted Emmanwori. It's intriguing to think about, but again, the positional value argument is one that I think is fair to make, because typically you can find quality safeties day 2 into day 3, and just to take a look at that last time that we saw safeties go off the board in round 1, there were 3 of them. The first one was Kyle Hamilton, pick 14 to Baltimore. Absolute stud, all-pro, second-team all-pro the last couple of years. Unquestionably a great pick. The other 2 safeties, Daxton Hill to Cincinnati, Lewis Cine to Minnesota. Daxton Hill, I believe the Bengals moved him to corner this past year. And it's been up and down for him. Lewis Cine has basically been a ghost, and he drafted of course by Minnesota, and he's moved on since then, moved on down the road. So I mean so really you got 3 players there, one a grand slam, one just okay, one a total bust. So that's a small sample size. I'm going to go back and sort of dive into the trends of safeties, but again, that's part of the thing that you'd have to deal with if you drafted a safety, is saying, okay, it's a positional value thing here. Could you have gotten a quality safety later? And then what are you going to get later? And to sort of illuminate the mock draft that Jordan Reed did, he did have Elijah Arroyo to the Broncos with the second round pick. So had them taking care of one of those skill must-haves that we talk about.
As long as it's Devin Neal in the third, I'd be okay with that. Mace, we're okay with everyone out there because we love talking Broncos. We appreciate everyone for joining us here on Orange and Blue today. But before we're out of here, how do folks help us out on YouTube?
Like,
Comment,
share,
subscribe,
hit that notification bell.
so that you
Never miss
a
vid.
vid. That's right. He's Andrew Mason. You follow him on all the socials at Mace Denver. I'm at Cecil Lammy saying OBT's BFD. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned. Stay frosty.